The digital alarm hummed at exactly 4:30. It was a sharp, persistent sound that cut through the absolute stillness of the room. Outside, the world was held in the deep, unmoving grip of pre-dawn darkness. Elena did not hesitate. The temptation to collapse back into the warmth of the mattress was there, a physical weight pulling at her limbs, but she pushed it aside with a single, practiced motion. She sat up, her spine straight, her eyes adjusting to the heavy shadows. She waited. She listened to the hum of the clock until it ceased, replaced by the crushing, heavy silence of the house. Every room around her was frozen. Every soul in the neighborhood was anchored in deep sleep. She took a breath, letting the cool, stale air of the early morning fill her lungs. This was her time. The hours belonged to her before the demands of the day could find her. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, felt the transition from the soft blankets to the solid, unyielding floor, and prepared to start. She navigated the hallway by memory alone, keeping her hand light against the wall to gauge the distance to the kitchen. The floorboards were punishingly cold, a sharp contrast to the residual heat of the bed. Each step acted as a jolt to her system, forcing her to remain present rather than drifting back into the haze of sleep. She felt the grain of the wood beneath her toes, the slight unevenness of the boards, and the subtle draft that crept beneath the door frames. It was a stark, physical reminder that the day had begun. She did not rush. She moved with a rhythmic, measured cadence that ignored the stillness of the house. The kitchen was a cavern of deep shadows, the appliances mere silhouettes against the faint gray light beginning to bleed through the window blinds. She reached the center of the kitchen, the linoleum floor mirroring the temperature of the wood in the hallway. Her breath came steady and slow. The discomfort of the cold was not an obstacle, but a tool, a necessary friction to strip away the last remnants of fatigue. She reached for the kettle, her movements precise and economy-driven, and prepared to claim the next hour for herself. The metal kettle clicked into place. Elena watched the indicator light glow, a single point of artificial color in the gloom. She measured the coffee grounds with precise, repetitive motions. The sound of the water began as a low rumble, then escalated into a rhythmic boil that filled the kitchen with the sharp, acidic scent of roasted beans. She did not look away. She watched the steam curl upward, thin ribbons of white vapor dissipating into the cool air of the room. When the drip finished, she poured the dark liquid into a mug. The ceramic was hot, a jarring, welcome contrast to her fingertips. She held the weight of it, feeling the heat radiate through her palms and settle into her arms. She stood motionless, watching the surface of the coffee ripple as she breathed. The steam brushed against her face, a warm, damp veil that cleared the last of the grogginess from her mind. This was the transition. The darkness in the room remained, but her focus was no longer diffused. She was sharp. She was awake. She took a slow, deliberate sip, the heat traveling down her throat, grounding her in the present moment. With the mug in her hand, she turned toward the wooden table. She pulled the heavy wooden chair out, the legs dragging against the floor with a rhythmic scrape that punctured the quiet. Elena sat, the chair frame firm against her back. She placed the mug down, the ceramic clinking softly against the table. From her side, she drew out a worn notebook. The cover was frayed at the corners, the texture rough under her touch. She opened it to a fresh page, the paper crisp and inviting. She hovered the pen over the surface for a heartbeat. A flicker of hesitation crossed her mind, the weight of the day ahead, but she exhaled, forcing the doubt away. Her hand moved with sudden, decisive force. She pressed the nib to the paper and wrote the first priority in bold, clean strokes. The ink bled slightly into the grain of the page. She paused, checked her mental list, and added the second, then the third. She did not stop to reflect or linger on the difficulty of the tasks. She simply defined them, stripping them of their complexity until they were nothing more than movements waiting to be executed. With the ink still drying, she felt the shift. The chaos of the upcoming day had been captured, categorized, and placed under her control. She marked a small line beneath the final entry and set the pen down, the plan ready to be enacted. Elena reached for the thick volume resting at the edge of the table. Its spine crackled as she opened it, a sound that cut through the silence of the kitchen. She turned to the marked page, her thumb pressing against the paper to keep it flat. She began to read, her eyes tracking each line with deliberate speed. Halfway down the page, she stopped. The argument presented was dense, requiring her to process the logic before moving forward. She read the passage again, slower this time, letting the meaning settle into her thoughts. She found the core idea, a principle of delegation and clarity. Without breaking her rhythm, she reached for her pen. She placed the tip against the paper, finding the anchor point of the sentence, and drew a straight, dark line beneath the words. The friction of the pen against the page was sharp and constant. She did not rush. She underlined a second phrase, then a third, each stroke an intentional commitment to the knowledge she was absorbing. She closed the book halfway, leaving a finger tucked inside to hold her place, and leaned back. The ideas were no longer just text. They were tools, sharpened and ready for use. She took another sip of coffee, the steam warming her face, and looked at the notebook sitting beside the book. The integration of theory and practice was complete. Elena pushed the book aside and turned her chair to face the window. She set her coffee mug down, the liquid inside now still and cooling. She placed both hands flat on her thighs, fingers splayed, and closed her eyes. The room felt larger, the silence expanding around her. She began the visualization. In her mind, she stood at the head of the conference room. She saw the faces of her team, the charts projected on the wall, and the heavy weight of the project brief. A sudden spike of anxiety flared a flash of doubt about the data, but she caught it. She inhaled slowly, counting to 4, and exhaled with equal control. The tension in her shoulders dropped. She returned to the scene. She walked through the presentation step by step, anticipating the questions, framing her responses, and visualizing the steady flow of her own voice. Each cycle of breath served as a physical seal, locking away the noise of the outside world. She built a mental fortress, brick by brick, imagining the presentation not as a hurdle, but as a solved puzzle. Her pulse slowed to match the rhythm of the house. She was no longer just preparing. She was fortifying her mind against the inevitable friction of the day. She sat perfectly still, anchored in the certainty of her own preparation. The darkness inside the kitchen began to thin. Elena remained motionless, her eyes still closed, but the quality of the air around her shifted. A faint, cool breeze drifted through the window frame. She felt the subtle change in temperature against her skin, a signal that the night was retreating. Outside, the horizon began to bleed with color. Thin, sharp lines of orange cut through the gray, stretching across the sky. The light spilled over the window ledge and crawled across the floorboards, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She opened her eyes. The familiar objects in the room, the coffee mug, the notebook, the chair appeared sharper, rendered in the high contrast light of early morning. The transition was absolute. The soft, protective cocoon of the pre-dawn hours was dissolving. She watched the orange glow expand, washing over the wooden table and catching the edge of her pen. She was no longer operating in the shadows. The world was waking, and the clarity she had cultivated was now a physical presence. She looked toward the window, her gaze steady, absorbing the movement of the light as it climbed the walls. She was ready. The silence of the house remained, but the energy within her had shifted from preparation to execution. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Elena did not jump, but her focus sharpened. She heard the soft, rhythmic thud of small feet hitting the carpeted floor. Her son was awake. The house, until now a sanctuary of her own design, began to reclaim its role as a family home. She stood up, the chair scraping softly against the wood. She looked down at the notebook, the pages filled with the architecture of her upcoming day. She did not rush, but her movements were precise. She picked up the book, flipped it shut, and slid it into the side pocket of her bag, pushing it deep until the leather edge was hidden from view. She smoothed the surface of the table with her palm, erasing the evidence of her morning work. The quiet was no longer Nkai. It was filled with the approaching sound of a door opening down the hall. She checked her watch. 2 hours of total, uninterrupted clarity were banked. A secret reservoir of strength she would draw upon long before the day reached its peak. She stood by the counter, hands resting on the edge, waiting. The transition was seamless. She had mastered the morning, and now she was ready to meet the rest of her life. The office was a hum of predictable activity until the notification sounded. It began with a single, sharp tone from the main server rack, followed by a sequence of rapid-fire alerts. People stood up. Chairs skidded backward against the carpet. Within seconds, the atmosphere shifted from steady productivity to frantic energy. Phones started ringing in a discordant chorus, one after another, layering over the sound of voices rising in volume. A team member hurried past, clutching a stack of folders, eyes wide with the sudden surge of pressure. Someone shouted across the floor, demanding a status update that no one could provide. The air grew thick with the sound of rapid typing and urgent, overlapping questions. The crisis had arrived in full force. Screens flickered with error codes, and the collective focus of the room splintered into a dozen different directions. Every person in the vicinity was moving, gesturing, or shouting into a handset. The sense of order that had defined the morning evaporated, replaced by a chaotic scramble. Panic was taking root, spreading from desk to desk as the scale of the problem became clear. The noise level hit a fever pitch, creating a storm of professional anxiety that threatened to overwhelm everyone present. Elena sat still. While the rest of the floor moved in jagged, frantic motions, she remained as fixed as a stone in a stream. Her hands rested on her desk, unmoving. The noise around her continued to escalate, a rising tide of questions and frantic demands for solutions that did not exist. She did not raise her voice. She did not join the scramble to the server room. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out the worn notebook. The movement was slow, deliberate, and entirely out of sync with the panic surrounding her. She cleared a small, empty patch on her desk, pushing aside a stack of tangled cables and abandoned folders. She opened the pages. The paper was smooth beneath her fingertips. She turned to the notes she had meticulously prepared hours earlier in the dark. A colleague stopped mid-stride, breath-hitching, watching her. Then another turned. The frantic energy of the room began to bank against her stillness, slowing down as if hitting an invisible barrier. She picked up a pen and began to read, her eyes scanning the ink with absolute focus. She was the anchor in the center of the storm, and for the first time since the alarm sounded, the room began to quiet. The error codes on the monitors were shifting, but Elena did not look at the screens. She looked at the ink on the page. She traced the lines she had written before dawn, comparing the projected workflow with the current cascade of system failures. The noise of the office faded into a dull hum as she isolated the variables. A missing link in the data flow emerged, hidden beneath the noise of the crashing servers. It was not a hardware failure. It was a sequence error. She tapped her pen against the desk, marking the exact point where the process had diverged from the plan. The solution was buried in the architecture of the morning notes, a contingency she had drafted when the house was quiet. She saw the path forward, clear and singular, cutting through the wreckage of the project. She stood up, her movements precise and efficient. The team hovered nearby, their faces drawn tight with uncertainty. Waiting for a signal, Elena pointed to the main console, her finger steady. She did not need to guess. The logic held firm. She had prepared for this exact breakdown hours before the day had even begun. The answer was in her hand, and now, she was ready to translate thought into action. Elena spoke first to the lead developer, her voice cutting through the remaining tension. Redirect all traffic to the secondary node. Do it now. He moved instantly. She turned to the infrastructure team. Isolate the input stream. Shut down port 42 and reroute through the firewall. A junior analyst hesitated, looking at the flickering screens with wide eyes. Elena stepped into his line of sight, grabbed his shoulder, and pointed to the terminal. Ignore the noise. Focus only on the data stream. Input the override code I just gave you. He blinked, nodded, and began typing. The erratic pacing of the office vanished. In its place, a rhythmic, mechanical hum emerged. People stopped running and started working. The team moved in a tight, synchronized loop, each action feeding into the next. Fear had been the primary driver, but now, purpose took its place. Elena stood back, her eyes tracking the flow of the work. She did not raise her voice again. She did not need to. Her plan acted as the nervous system for the entire group. Every keystroke, every command, and every adjustment followed the sequence she had mapped out before the sun had even risen. The panic was dead. The system hit the exact threshold Elena had noted in her journal. The secondary server flared, a red light pulsing against the cool blue of the monitors. Most of the team froze, waiting for instructions. But Elena had already turned the page in her notebook. She knew the threshold was coming. She signaled the lead developer without looking up from her notes. The load balancer is failing. Switch to the manual override sequence now. The developer punched in the command. The red light vanished instantly. It was as if the crisis were reading from her script. Every escalation of the error, every unexpected jump in the data volume, was a mirror of the scenario she had played out while the house was still asleep. She checked the time on the wall clock, then checked her notebook. She was 3 minutes ahead of the projected timeline. The logic she had forged in the quiet hours held under the pressure of the afternoon. She walked to the central hub, her hand resting on the console, and verified the final data packets. The chaos was folding in on itself, retreating exactly as she had predicted before the world had even started its day. She had built the solution in the dark, and now it was guiding the team through the light. The final data packet cleared the gate. A soft chime sounded from the main terminal, followed by the steady, rhythmic hum of a normal network. Elena tapped the enter key one last time and closed her notebook. The office went silent. No one moved. The lead developer stared at his screen, then at her, his hands hovering over the keyboard. The adrenaline that had fueled the last few hours evaporated, leaving behind a sudden, heavy stillness. Elena tucked her pen into the spiral binding and slid the book into her bag. She did not boast. She did not explain. She simply walked toward the exit, her footsteps clicking against the floor tiles in the quiet room. Her team watched her go, their faces reflecting a mix of disbelief and relief. They had started the morning in total disarray, expecting the worst. Yet here they stood, with every system fully restored and every file intact. She reached the door and paused, looking back once. The monitors glowed with a calm, steady blue light. She pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. The chaos of the morning was gone, leaving behind only the quiet authority she had carried with her since before dawn. The crisis had vanished, leaving the room to process the efficiency of her silent, early labor. The commute home was a blur of gray streets and shifting traffic lights, but Elena kept her focus on the rhythm of the road. The intensity of the office had faded into a dull, manageable hum at the back of her mind. She pulled into the driveway just as the last of the daylight dipped behind the roof line. Stepping out of the vehicle, the air felt crisp and cooling against her skin. She walked to the front door, the key sliding into the lock with a familiar mechanical click. Inside, the house was a sanctuary of shadows and silence. She stepped over the threshold, the floorboard settling under her weight. She moved to the entryway, took a deep breath, and unburdened her shoulders. She reached up, lifted her coat from her frame, and hung it on the wall hook. There was no residue of the day's panic here, no lingering echoes of the system failure. She stood for a moment in the dim hall, feeling the weight of the day drain away, leaving only a quiet, steady stillness. She was exhausted, but the exhaustion was clean, like the end of a long, productive run. She walked further into the house, her movements deliberate and soft. The quiet she had cultivated in the early hours of the morning had followed her home, anchoring her through the storm and into the peace of the evening. The hallway remained still as Elena moved deeper into the house. From the shadows near the living room, a pair of eyes tracked her every motion. Her son stood motionless against the wall, watching. He did not speak. He simply observed the way she moved, the absence of lingering stress, and the steady rhythm of her walk. When she finally stepped into the kitchen and set her bag on the counter, he moved forward. His footsteps were light, barely audible against the floorboards. He reached the counter and looked up at the surface. There, resting beside her keys, lay the notebook. He reached out, his small fingers brushing the edge of the cover. He pulled it toward him, the leather feeling rough and worn under his touch. He opened it. His eyes moved across the pages, scanning the lines of ink that marched in perfect, orderly rows across the paper. There were lists, dates, and complex diagrams of projects solved. He turned one page, then another, the sound of the paper crisp in the quiet room. He stood there for a long time, tracing the ink with his thumb, reading the silent evidence of her discipline. He looked from the page to the doorway where she had disappeared, his face reflecting a dawning realization of the work hidden behind the calm he had observed all day. Elena stepped back into the kitchen and saw him standing there with the notebook held open in his hands. She did not snatch it away. Instead, she walked over, placed a hand softly on his shoulder, and closed the cover. She took the book from his grip and set it aside, then pulled out the chair next to him. She did not explain the early mornings or the hours of planning. She simply reached for his math workbook. "Show me where you are stuck," she said. The boy pointed to a column of long division. She leaned in, her movements rhythmic and precise. She guided his pencil, showing him how to break the problem into smaller, manageable parts. He watched her hand, then mirrored the stroke, his own pencil scratching against the paper. For the next 30 minutes, the only sound in the house was the steady ticking of the clock and the soft friction of lead on wood. She corrected his errors without frustration, pointing to the logic of the numbers until the answer clicked into place. He looked at her, then back at the page, his focus sharpening to match her own. She taught him the rhythm of persistence, not by speaking of it, but by living it in the small, quiet spaces of their evening together. Years drifted by, shifting the landscape of the home from the small, cluttered table to a quiet, private office. The boy grew, his stride lengthening, his shoulders broadening until he moved through the halls with a weight of his own. The house changed, but the rhythm of the early hours remained the constant, unseen pulse beneath the floorboards. The sun had not yet touched the sky when the alarm clock cut through the dark at 5 a.m. A man stood in the silence of his study, the room still smelling faintly of old books and cold air. He did not reach for a phone or a screen. He walked directly to the desk, his movements measured and deliberate. He pulled out the chair, the wood scraping softly against the floor. He sat, the chair sinking slightly under his weight, and smoothed his palms across the surface of the workspace. The world outside remained frozen in the grip of the pre-dawn hours. He reached into his bag, produced a notebook, and laid it open. The page was blank, waiting, a clean expanse of paper ready for the work ahead. He sat perfectly still for a heartbeat, breathing in the quiet, and then reached for his pen. The cycle had found its new anchor. The pen hovered over the paper. He did not write immediately. Instead, he looked at his own hand, the grip of his fingers on the barrel, and recognized the angle. It was the same posture he had watched for years across the kitchen table. He remembered the sound of her pencil against the page, the way she never rushed to calculation, and the absolute stillness she maintained while the world slept. The realization hit him with the force of a sudden shift in weight. Every morning he had spent in his own quiet study was not his own invention. It was a ghost of her discipline. He looked at the blank page and saw more than just paper. He saw the foundation she had built for him, 1 hour at a time. Long before he understood the value of the quiet, he straightened his back, adjusted the lamp to sharpen the light on the surface, and let out a single, slow breath. The doubt that had lingered in the edges of his mind vanished. He pressed the nib to the paper. He began to write, not just to complete a task, but to carry the weight of the habit she had placed in his hands. He was no longer just working, he was continuing the practice. The ink flowed in steady, rhythmic lines across the page, each word locked into place with the same precision he had observed 1,000 times in his youth. The morning sun began to climb, casting long, sharp shadows across the desk, mirroring the exact light patterns that had once defined her own morning sessions. He paused, turned the page, and the sound of the paper crinkling filled the room. It was a familiar, grounding noise. He had mastered the silence just as she had, carving out a space of intent before the demands of the day arrived. The house breathed around him, quiet and still, a sanctuary built on the foundation of those early, unseen hours. He did not need to speak of it. The discipline was the language. He set the pen down, aligned it with the edge of the notebook, and stood up to face the coming light. The cycle was no longer a fragment of the past. It was the architecture of his present. He moved toward the window, looked out at the waking world, and stepped forward. The legacy was secure, carried into the next day by the same quiet strength that had first defined it decades before. He was ready.